Hello everyone. In the rest of the class, we will focusing on a recent topic in organizational studies. Some of the topics that are relatively new in this field. We learn sense-making, high reliability organizations, new institutions, and critical management studies. These serve to expand the traditional understanding of organizational theory. In today's class, we will focusing on sense-making, organizing, and high reliability organizations. Let me share the slide. While traditional theories, organizational theories tended to focusing on fixed, stable aspect, such as structure and culture, these new views focusing on process and constant change. I start to talk about the case of sense making. This word might be new to you, but recently very common in organizational studies. We make sense of a variety of issues to spend our life. This might be different from traditional view of decision making. Let me ask you a simple question in your daily life. Do you think before you act, or do you act before you think? In fact, the answer might be not simple. When you press pause, do you ever find that you don't think much and your body just moves along? In conversation with others, I might often surprised to hear what I have said, and I realize that I have been thinking about such things. Carl Weick, one of the leading scholars of the concept of sense-making, asked, how can I know what I'm thinking until I know what I'm saying? So rather than thinking before I speak, I may be thinking in the act of speaking. Of course, there are times when I talk my thought after careful conversation in a meeting situation. In fact, it seems that thinking and doing are closely interrelated. It is said that seeing is believing, but let's think about believing is seeing. For example, in interpersonal relationships, for example, once you start to dislike someone, you start to look for only the bad aspect. As a result, the relationship becomes being even worse. It is possible to look at things through filters. Garfinkel is a founder of the branch of sociology called ethnomethodology. Carl Weick presents some of Garfinkel's insight. The jury seemed to have decided on the death sentence first, and then worked out the reason for it. White commented that what I found very interesting was Garfinkel's assertion that jurors do not seem to first assert the bad faith or scope of the defendant, then condemn it, and finally choose the sentence. Rather, jurors first decide on the sentence, then decide on the facts that justify the sentence from among the various arguments. Jurors essentially created a line of reasoning that was semantically consistent, and then made the line of reasoning appear as if it had actually happened. Work also present another story of people's interpretation and actions. This is an episode of the Hungarian army. A lieutenant in Hungarian army platoon sent a scout team out into the frozen wilderness. Shortly thereafter, it began to snow. The snowfall continued for 2 days. During the time, scouting team did not return. The lieutenant wondered if he had sent his men to their deaths. But on the third day, the team came back. They said, "We found out we are lost and thought it was the end." Then one of the troopers found a map in his pocket. It helped us to keep our heads cool. We camped and weathered and blizzards. Then we used the map to find our way back. That's how we end up here. The lieutenant picked up the map that had saved their lives and took a long look at it. To his surprise, it was not a map of the Alps, but a map of Pyrenees. White explained the case in the following way. The map of the different locations actually helped the members restore their sense of security and calmness. Then they continued to update their sense of where they are, using the imaginary they had developed in the previous training and paying attention to clues in the surrounding area. And they succeed in returning. The activity of human sense-making of the things in action, as in the episode of the Hungarian army survivor, is called sense-making. Hungarian army survivors, this is an activity that differs from the traditional model of decision-making. In that it focusing on interpretation and meaning-making patterns. According to White, in decision-making, the focus is on the calculative rationality of data. And in decision-making, the focusing on dealing with uncertainty caused by lack of data. Here, uncertainty is defined as the difference between information we need and the information we have. For example, uncertainty is the difference between the data that is really needed to predict an earthquake and the data that is currently available. One of the challenges of decision making is to reduce this uncertainty. Uncertainty, however, is not the only problem in the organization. The equivocality, the coexistence of multiple meanings, is also a major challenge. And sense making provides the tool to deal with equivocality. When we are struggling with equivocality, what we needed is not a lot of information, but a clear sense of the values and priority and about preference that tell us which aspects are important. In sense making, the rationality of the situation, the contextual rationality, is more important than rationality of the calculation. The focus is then action and interpretation of people in the situation. In such sense making, individuals are surprised by discrepancy between their original anticipations and actual events, and experience interruption. Retrospectively search for cues in ambiguous situations, enact sensible environments, and construct plausible understanding. This concept of sense making is useful to capture the various activity of organizations. Let me share the example of sense making. In 2011, at the Kamaishi Elementary School in Iwate Prefecture, all 184 students survived the massive tsunami caused by Great East Japan earthquake. The experience of children who survived the crisis with their judgment and imagination as good as those of adults and had drawn attention both in Japan and abroad, and has been called the miracle of Kamaishi. This episode exemplifies the process of sense making. The trajectory of the evacuation process is as follows. The first, children gather in the schoolyard after experiencing a large earthquake. Then they responded to the teacher's call to run fast and started running. Eventually, they reached the planned evacuation center. According to the disaster prevention plan, they could have stayed here. However, old woman spoke to the children. She said she had never seen a cliff collapse before, but this was the first time she had seen one. This was a sign of disaster, she said. Influenced by this word, children ran further from a planned shelter. If they had stayed there, they would have been caught in the tsunami. In fact, no one knew when or how far the tsunami would reach. It was also unclear to them how far they should run. The whole process reminds us of sense making. In this case, children and the teacher were surprised by the discrepancy between the initial prediction and the actual earthquake, and continuously search for the clues as to how far to escape. In doing so, they believe the old woman's retrospective clues and were able to run further away from their initial shelter. They enacted another places as a new shelters. This series of the interpretations and actions were based on the contextual rationality rather than calculated rationality. They also developed a plausible understanding rather than accurate understanding. In order to understand the concept of sense making, it is important to understand the concept of enactment. Enactment is bracketing some portion of the stream of the experience for further attention. Individuals create a part of the environment they face. White's views differ from the view of the environment and the human beings as independent, separated entities, in that he assumes that two are closely integrated. In other words, it can be said that our subjectivity creates part of the environment. Even in the case of miracle in Kamaishi, children define their shelter based on sense making. People choose part of their environment. There is no objective external environment that everyone can understand, but people subjectively choose a range of environment. White mentioned, when people make laws, they are picking up undefined space, time, and action, drawing boundaries, establishing categories, and attaching labels that create a new aspect of the environment that did not exist before. The sense-making episode teaches us the importance of the flow of phenomena. Structures are the fixed relationships that can be seen in a segment sliced off at a certain point in time. These are organization charts and the standard operating systems, procedures. On the other hand, process is a change with time. That is a flow and constant change. White considers organizational phenomena as a process of organizing instead of the stable snapshot of structure. The view of organizing includes several ideas. Organization attempt to transform equivocal information into non-equivocal one, which that organization can operationalize and is accustomed to. First, organizing takes place. Then the reason for organizing becomes clear. The action precedes the goal. An organization is a loose coupling of various elements. Unlike the bureaucratic view of organization, where the parts are tightly combined by rules and structures, in the view of organizing, each element of organization is highly independent and loosely connected. White pointed out, when talking about organization, it is tempting to use a lot of nouns. However, such nouns seem to give an unintended stable image of the situation they are supposed to describe. I would say that we should eliminate nouns if we want to understand organizations. If researchers of organization would reduce the use of nouns and use verbs and verbal nouns more freely, they would pay more attention to processes and we would be more clear about how to understand and manage them. Relying on the sense-making and organizing, White has conducted research on high reliability organization, that is HRO. High reliability organizations refers to an organization that can operate under severe conditions and still keep the number of accidents below the standard. Examples include nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear power plants, air traffic control systems, and emerging medical centers. White asked, why are these able to keep the number of the accidents under control under difficult circumstances? For example, the deck of the nuclear power aircraft carrier has been called the most dangerous 4.5 acre in the world. On the narrow 330-meter long deck, fighter jet repeatedly runs around every 40 to 60 seconds. Crew members refuel, load weapons and ammunition, and perform maintenance and inspections. If a single boat remains on the deck and the jet engine of the fighter absorbs the boat and explodes, there will be heavy disaster. In addition, crew is faced with complex conditions such as weather, sea level conditions, visibility, and fluidity of return time. To prevent such catastrophe, daily checks are conducted by maintenance personnel and pilots. There have been accidents at HRO. The accident occurred at TEPCO's Fukushima nuclear power plant was the most serious nuclear accident since the Chernobyl nuclear power plant accident in April 1986. Due to the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami, the power supply was shut down and emergency power was lost. As a result, the nuclear reactors became uncontrollable, spreading large amounts of radioactive materials. White and Sutcliffe point out pitfalls of conventional mechanisms, attempting to prevent possible threats through highly conventional means such as planning, standard operating procedures, job rules, and informal instructions. Planning, however, neglects the unexpected. Many companies today are unprepared to face the unexpected. Conventional mechanisms often undermine the ability to maintain the mindedness and actually increase the threat. In the organizations that are not HROs, there is a strong tendency to isolate only the failures, blame the individual, and not learn from mistakes. These high reliability organizations maintain reliable performance despite constant exposure to the unexpected, in part by developing and maintaining the capability of mindfulness. A well-developed capability for mindfulness catches the unexpected earlier when it is smaller, comprehends its potential importance despite the small size of the disruption, and removes, contains, or rebound from the effect of the unexpected. By managing the unexpected mindfully, HROs continue to deliver reliably the performance they were chartered to deliver. Here, mindfulness means that combination of ongoing scrutiny of existing expectations, continuous refinement, and differentiation of expectations based on newer experience, willingness to and capability to invent new expectations that make sense of unprecedented events, a more nuanced appreciation of context and ways to deal with it, and identifications of new dimensions of context that improve the foresight and current functioning. The opposite of mindfulness is mindlessness. There are symptoms related to mindlessness. Early warning signs of danger are unnoticed. Change in context are unnoticed. Outdated diagnosis of problems are unnoticed. There was an underlying style of mental functioning in which people tried to implement the measures by following rowing recipes, imposing all categories to classify what they saw, acting with some rigidity, operating on automatic pilot, and mislabeling unfamiliar new contexts as a familiar old ones. So how can the organization improve its mindfulness? There are 5 processes to improve the mindfulness of organizations. The first is preoccupation with failure, trying hard to detect new and trivial mistakes, trying to anticipate and identify serious mistakes that we do not want to make. We know that our knowledge of the situation, the environment, and our group is incomplete. Acknowledging that we have incomplete knowledge when looking for mistakes. The second process is reluctant to simplify interpretations. With closer attention to context and context comes more differentiation of world views and mindset. Being preoccupied with complicated their simplification as they are with proving their failure. Realizing that the situation people face is complex and volatile, and that it's impossible to know everything and predict it perfectly. Simplifying the rest and looking for more, trying to catch a subtle sense of meaning. Increasing repertory of activities. For example, an air traffic control reader already has a vast amount of experience. Yet every day he reflects on the day's event and records important detail and reflections. This habit contributes to constant complexity of his own understanding. The third is the sensitivity to operations. Ongoing concern with unexpected events usually originate in latent failures. Here, latent failures are loopholes in the system's defenses, barriers, and safeguards whose potential existed for some time prior to the onset of the accident sequence, though usually without any obvious bad effect. The fourth is commit to resilience. Resilience is a combination of keeping errors small and of improvising workarounds that keep the system functioning. The signature of an HRO is not that it is error-free, but the errors do not disable it. HROs develop capabilities to detect, contain, and bounce back from those inevitable errors that are part of an indeterminate world. It also has simulation and training for worst-case scenarios. The final distinctive feature of HRO is their difference to expertise. HRO cultivate diversity, not just because it helps them notice more in complex environments, but also because it helps them to do more with the complexities they spot. HRs push decision-making down and around. Decisions are made on the front line, and authority migrates to the people with the most expertise, regardless of their rank. Decisions come from the top when it is normal. They migrate during high-tempo operations, and predefined emergency structure kicks in. For example, in the Space Shuttle Columbia accident, despite the direct threat to life in an uncertain environment, management failed to respect the engineers and failed to recognize that the different data standards and decision-making process would be more appropriate. The concept of a safe culture illuminates what it means to create a culture of mindfulness. There are key features. The first is informed culture. Members are willing to confess their own faults. The second is just culture. That is an atmosphere of trust in which people are encouraged, even rewarded for providing essential safety-related information, but in which they are clear about where the line must be drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. The third is flexible culture that adapts to changing demands. The fourth is learning culture that continuously learn deviant signs and new coping strategy. So organizations need to craft its safety culture as mindful cultures. This is the end of today's class. Today we run relatively new content such as sense making, organizing, and managing high reliability organizations. Actually, these are closely related to our daily lives. So I hope that you will use this concept to pay more attention to organizational phenomena.